Hello. We want to look at another important area in crime analysis called crime mapping. We noted last time that crime analysis has several methods, and one of them is crime mapping. So today we want to pay some attention on crime mapping. We want to understand what is meant by crime mapping and the various methods that are normally employed when undertaking crime mapping. So this is basically a continuation of our discussion on crime analysis, and it forms an important area of how crime is analyzed and understood. So I want to welcome you to this very critical area of crime analysis. Crime mapping can be understood in many ways. So I want us to look at some of the ways on how crime mapping has been defined. This is important in terms of enabling us understand what is meant by crime mapping, and also in laying down the foundation for the discussion that is going to ensue after this. By crime mapping, we mean the process of using a geographic information system to conduct spatial analysis of crime, problems, and other police-related issues. But the concept crime mapping has also been understood as a process through which crime analysts and crime researchers use location-based information about activities or about criminal activities or crime events in order to detect spatial patterns in criminal activities. We have to look at the two definitions, and one thing that comes out is that when we want to undertake crime mapping, the major objective is to understand crime in terms of its spatial distribution. That is, the geographical distribution of crime in a given geographical area. So basically, when we talk of mapping, we simply are looking at what researchers in criminology or security, and also what analysts of crime do in order to locate where criminal activities are, and also to try to understand their distribution. That is, how spread or how localized are criminal activities in a given area. So if you want to understand how localized these activities are, then you engage in what we call a crime mapping. Before we developed or we made advances in research, in geography, in space analysis, and the rest, crime mapping involved placing physical markers, such as pins on maps to designate the locations where crimes occurred. That was when we had not made serious advancements in technology. Otherwise, today, we use computers and geographical information systems to understand that. And therefore, patterns of criminal activities were determined previously through visual inspection of these maps. I think today, the aspect of crime mapping is quite advanced, as we are going to see in this particular discussion. There are several techniques that are used when we want to understand or when we undertake crime mapping. One of them is called the hotspot marking. From our previous discussion, we noted that a hotspot is basically an area that has higher concentration of events compared to expected number given a random distribution of events. So when you talk of hotspot, it's simply an area that has higher distribution of activities or concentration of activities. Again, it depends on the issue that we are defining. If it is drought, climate experts would consider areas that have a lot of drought as hotspot. If it is conflict analysts or experts or security agents will classify those areas with high conflict concentration as conflict hotspots. Now, with regard to crime, hotspot is an area that has a lot of criminal activities compared to other areas that are closer to that place. Now, when you talk of hotspot mapping, it is basically a technique which is used to identify areas with a high concentration of crime by analyzing data and visualizing its spatiality. Rather, it's spatially. That is, how spread is that kind of data between one location to the other location. So hotspot marking is a technique that we use to help determine where crime may happen next, using data from the past to inform future actions. In other words, if we have current data on crime hotspots, it is possible for crime analysts and researchers to use that data to analyze the trends and see where within a given geographical area we are likely to again experience higher cases or incidences of criminal activities. So we use hotspot marking as a basic form of crime prediction and rely on retrospective data, that is past data, to identify the areas of high concentrations of crime and where policing and other crime reduction resources should be deployed. In other words, when you talk of crime mapping, our concern is we want to look at where most of the criminal activities are concentrated, and we do this by looking at existing data. So by using existing data or historical data, it is possible for us to predict whether the trend will proceed, will continue, or there are likely to be changes in some areas. And once that is done, it then enables law enforcement agencies to plan on how to counter criminal activities or lay down preventive measures so that it stops the escalation or the emergence of new forms of crime. It also acts as a basic technique for predicting where crime may occur, using the premise that retrospective patterns of crime are a useful indicator for future patterns. In other words, when we are using hotspot marking, it is possible for law enforcement institutions to use that data to look at where exactly are we likely to have a lot of criminal activities based on the current data that we have. So it's about using it to give an indication of the patterns of criminal activities in the near future. The other important technique that we use when we are undertaking crime mapping is called the geographic profiling. Geographic profiling is a criminal investigative methodology that analyzes the locations of a connected series of crimes to determine the most probable area of offender residence. And this type of crime mapping technique is based on the assumption that criminals reveal themselves through the locations where they commit crimes, and geographical profiles focus on where crimes are committed. This approach to crime analysis assumes the following. One, that the offender has a single stable home based throughout the series of crimes. Number two, the offender finds their target or victim in the course of a geographic search originating from that home base. And number 3, the offender commits the crime where they find their target or victim. So when you talk of this type of crime, it's assuming that there's a specific location where offenders live and also where they commit crime. And the assumption here is that offenders live in a fixed position and also they commit crime in areas that are not very far from where they live, so that after committing crime, they retreat to where they live. This is the assumption. Now, this technique was developed to focus on serial crime investigations on the home base of the offender by analyzing the geographic pattern of a linked series of crimes. In other words, when we're using this type of technique, the focus is largely on serial offenders. If a crime is occurring in a particular area and it is still not yet known who exactly is responsible, then geographic profiling is used. And the assumption here is that it is not possible for a criminal to commit crime, then travel to a very far or a distant place, then again some other time travels again to the point where they commit crime. This can be quite expensive, and there is fear again on the part of criminals that if the distances between where they live and where they commit crime is quite far, then it becomes impossible for them to engage in crime without being detected. Now, the technique involves analyzing the location of a connected series of crimes and looking at factors such as the spatial relationship between the different crime scenes and what these reveal in relation to the perpetrator. So when you talk about all these things, it is quite important to understand that when we are talking about geographic profiling as a crime mapping technique, the focus here is simply on individual serial offenders. And the assumption is that people commit crime not very far from where they live. And after committing crime, they go back to their places of residence. And that offenders have a fixed location where they commit crime and go back to such particular places. The other technique of crime mapping is called the time series analysis. When we look at the other methods, we talked of Hotspot, which determines places with a high concentration of criminal activities. When we looked at the geographical profiling, the focus is on the serial offender and the location where they live and where they commit crime. Now we turn our attention to time series analysis. Time series analysis is a process of analyzing data points that are ordered in time to understand the relationship and patterns within the data. Time is a specific way of analyzing a sequence of data points collected over an interval of time, and it involves analysts recording data points at consistent intervals over a set period of time, rather than just recording the data points intermittently or randomly. For example, the analyst may record criminal activity in respect of variables such as the type of building the crime occurred in, time of the day or day of week of the crime, age or sex of the individuals involved, and the value of any items stolen. So that if, say, one wishes to know whether criminal activities in terms of concentration, in terms of severity, in terms of the people committing such crimes, and in terms of property that are targeted within a given period, then the analyst, the crime analyst, can record information from time to time. For instance, they might want to say what kind of data, crime data, are we likely to get, say, for the month of November, the month of December, or a period maybe between January and March. So you might want now to record to start recording criminal activities between, say, January and March. And in that case, again, you say that that is maybe quarter 1. Again, another time maybe between April and June. That again is another quarter 2, then quarter 3, then the fourth quarter. So that at the end of the day, at the end of the year, you want to compare whether there are changes in terms of the type of crimes being committed, the days of the week when crime are being committed, and the age or gender of individuals that are involved in crime, and also the types and values of property that are being stolen within a given period of time. If you do that, then you are doing a method of crime analysis that we now call the time series analysis. Another important technique that is used when we are undertaking crime mapping is called the spatial analysis. And spatial analysis refers to a take of techniques that examines the location, the distribution, and relationships of geographical features and phenomena to derive new information and knowledge. It uses statistical techniques to quantify geography-based relationships between crime locations. And spatial analysis can help researchers understand how environmental factors such as poverty rates, population density, or the built environment influence crime patterns. For example, in quite so many places, there have been studies that have shown that criminal activities tend to be more common in slum areas. So the question is it because of poverty in slum areas? Is it because of high population? Or is it because the way the slum area is built, such that it provides hiding ground for criminals, and also inability, it makes it difficult for the law enforcement agencies to access it on a regular basis and therefore increase their presence. So when we are looking at spatial analysis, the concern is we are looking at the geography-based relationships between crime and crime locations. For example, in some of the areas in North Rift region, where we have had a lot of criminal activities around Kasasli, the focus has been, is there a relationship between the geographical terrain of that area, rather the geographical terrain of that area, and banditry? Because it is argued that some places are so hilly, some have valleys that the criminals are so much accustomed to, but can offer significant challenge to the law enforcement agencies when they try to access those locations and to wipe out the criminals. So there's a possibility, therefore, that the geographical terrain of an area can be a hindrance or a motivator for the commission of crime. And at the same time, it might facilitate or hinder the interventions of law enforcement agencies in terms of arresting criminal activities. So when we talk about spatial analysis, we're basically looking at the geography-based factors that facilitate commission of crime, the environmental factors that facilitate commission of crime. Is it poverty that is linked to maybe increased cases of crime? Is it high population growth in an area? Is it the way the area is built in terms of buildings, in terms of road infrastructure, in terms of artificial forests and others? Could there be a link between that and crime? And then what are the various patterns of criminal activities? Are there criminal activities that certain geographical locations or geographical factors thrive because of certain geographical factors? Or are there others that becomes quite difficult to commit, again, based on the environment in which the victim and the offender live. So this is basically what spatial analysis looks at. The other technique that is used in criminal analysis or in crime mapping is called association analysis. And association analysis, also called network or link analysis, it reviews the relationship or connections among people and organizations involved in a criminal activity. And association analysis can be used to uncover new conspirators and to show the geographical breadth of the criminal activities. It is used when there are numerous data gathered that reflect relationships. Such techniques are used when you want to understand narcotic networks, organized crime, terrorism, fraud, and other conspiracy investigations. For example, an investigator may be interested in understanding corruption, how funds from a given organization, be it government or private sector, was embezzled. Might be interested in looking at first who was, say, awarded the tender and where the money was banked, and the movement of money from the initial account where it was banked to different bank accounts belonging to different people. And then the relationship or the association that exists between the various recipients of the money and the person who is being suspected to have participated in the crime. This is what association analysis looks at. That is, who is the suspect and who are the other people that this suspect is connected to. Because it is not possible, for instance, organized crimes such as drug trafficking to be a one-man affair. There must be people locally and even some internationally. So what is association, for instance, between the initial people that purchase it and the transportation network that exists? So when a criminal analyst is interested in understanding the various networks that exists between in commission of a given crime, they undertake what we call association analysis. And this kind of analysis will reveal the various players, the various institutions that are involved in the commission of a given criminal conduct or a criminal activity. Because certain criminal activities, you might have the face of one person that is known, but beneath that face, there are several faces and several individuals, figures, and institutions that are involved in such an elaborate network, such as narcotics trade. The other technique that we use is called communication analysis. And communication analysis basically involves studying oral and written communications, including patterns, types, and breakdowns to understand and improve the process, often focusing on organizational settings. Analysis, in our case, may entail obtaining information on the area codes and the numbers that were called, the times, the dates, the locations, the directions, and the duration of the calls, and then incoming calls in the course of cellular telephone. So when we talk about communication analysis, we are basically looking at the various types of communications, the people involved, the times, the location where the callers and the recipients of certain information were, and whether there is any connection between locational codes and where crimes were committed. For example, in some cases, if a criminal activity is reported to have occurred somewhere and there are certain suspects that have been apprehended, then the investigator or the crime analyst might be interested in understanding the various people the suspect communicated with. Who are the various people that the suspect communicated with? The other thing that they might be interested in understanding is the law call locations whose telephone calls were available at the point where the murder or at the crime scene, so that all this can point out whether or not certain individuals were involved or they were not involved. And communication analysis should result in a written report, which includes conclusions about the communication activity and also make recommendations based on those conclusions. The types of conclusions, recommendations most often seen identify new conspirators and suggest that their telephone records be given out for comparison so that they can be recorded and then conclusions made. So when we talk about communication analysis, basically we are looking at the various people that the offender communicated with and whether such people may have been part of the criminal network or not. Whether paid, like now in the modern times, whether payments were made between the offender, the primary suspect, and other people, where people were, the kind of communication that were given, among other things. So all that is built up together to understand the patterns of communication that exist between the offender and other people, and whether such individuals are in any way part and parcel of the network that was used to commit the crime. The last technique of crime mapping is called the event flow analysis. And event flow analysis focuses on a series of events that lead to a criminal activity. It may involve several paths of flow, depicting multiple actors or victims where their paths converge. It can point to missing information or conflicts in previously provided statements and corroborating information regarding potential suspects. Event flow analysis can be used in financial fraud, homicide, serial crime, robbery, terrorism, arson, and other events-oriented investigations and prosecutions. It can also be used to show the growth and development of criminal organizations within the strategic analysis. Let me give a very clear example, or rather a very simple example of a scenario here that probably would fit what we call event flow analysis. Assuming there was political violence, assuming, for instance, there was a political rally, and in that rally, supporters of different politicians fought, and weapons such as clubs, pangas, machetes, and others were used. So the question that then comes in, when you want to now use event flow analysis, you are concerned about activities that happened prior to the incident. For example, were there meetings that were held maybe the night before the event to plan on how to execute that particular criminal activity? If there were, who were the people in that meeting? What is it that was discussed in that meeting? Where was that meeting held? Are there signs that there was a clear plan to, say, commit the crime? For example, are there instances where machetes were bought, say, in a local hardware or in supermarket in large numbers, so that, or clubs were bought in large numbers, so that, were there planning that was done before? Were there monies that were distributed in a given meeting? And what was the pattern of how such cash was used and shared among different parties that participated in that criminal activity? Were there meetings that were organized after the event just to discuss the postmortem of how the attack went? So when you talk of event flow analysis, we are basically looking at the series or the sequence of activities that happened before and after a given criminal activity, so that we are able to know where were the meetings planned, who organized the meeting, which kind of resources were used to mobilize people, and who was assigned the responsibility of leading the criminal activity. So all that helps us in terms of understanding the various people, the networks, and the way a given criminal activity or a given conduct was planned and executed. Up to there, I think we have come to the end of our discussion on mapping of crime, and we have talked about several techniques, including hotspot marking, geographic profiling, association analysis, spatial analysis, communication analysis, and lastly, event flow analysis. Note down anything that is not clear and then share it out at the appropriate time for further deliberation. Thank you so much for your time.